Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. And it's great to see a bunch of you here. I do have a request if anyone is up for turning their camera on. It does help me feel like I'm talking who I'm talking to. So if you're up for it, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Yay. Cool. Also, thanks for joining us today on what is maybe the first day of summer in the UK, if that's where you're calling in from. So it's good to see you here. So I'm not sure, actually, before I start, it would be interesting just to get a sense of like, you know, are people filmmakers or like interested, like, or maybe I should say that I'm happy to take this discussion in whichever direction people are interested in, whether it's to do with like the films I've done or the process and things like that. So just to say, feel free to ask anything at any point, just kind of put your hand up or just turn your mic on. So I guess an intro to who I am is where I'm going to start. I came to filmmaking, I guess not initially directly. I came to the UK over 20 years ago to study. I studied something called visual anthropology, no, social anthropology, but I had a big interest in documentary and filmmaking. So this led me to study afterwards a master's in visual anthropology, which is essentially bringing together the social science and the research of that social science with filmmaking. And I'm not going to talk much about that other than to mention the film I made while I was a student, because that film kind of has had repercussions up until my most recent film. And I made my first film essentially when I was a student in Syria, in a monastery called Marmusa, excuse me, which was led by an Italian Jesuit priest called Paolo Dall'Olio. And at the time I was kind of interested in the stories of two of the monks there, but the material that I filmed then, I guess, has started to take on another meaning as time went by, especially because my new film features the story of Father Paolo, who has been kidnapped since 2013. So I just wanted to put that out there as a holding thing, and then we'll kind of touch on that with the newer film. But it's just interesting, kind of, when you start working in film, you don't always necessarily know where life leads you or where it takes you. And for me, unfortunately, because I'm very close to Syria, so I'm Palestinian, I grew up in Kuwait. I have Syrian family as well, and I've lived there at different points in my life, and it's a place that's very dear and close to my heart. And also a place that sort of started my filmmaking. I guess it's a place I've returned to a lot with my filmmaking, and that's informed kind of my work over the years. So I am an Arab woman, but I haven't only made films in or on the Arab world. And so the first thing I was going to show you is a little clip from essentially my first short that was sort of when I was no longer a student, called Bread Makers. And I made this film in Edinburgh. And it got support from something called Bridging the Gap, which is the Scottish Documentary Institute, which is this amazing organization that supports filmmakers, basically. So I made my first short in this bakery, which I was actually working in at the time before I figured out, I guess, my filmmaking career. So I'm just going to show you a short clip from that film. It's a bakery that's a place that trains and supports people with adults with learning difficulties. And it was a really inspiring place that I really loved working in, sort of as a support worker. So let me just set this up to share.
One, two, three, what was that? 4 and 5.
Hello, is that James? Hello, how are you? I'm fine. Are you ready to give me your bread order? Take it away. Hold on, 2 linseed, 1 oatmeal, and 5 biscuits for today. Is that everything? Okay, thank you, James. Goodbye. Goodbye.
You should have put it over there in the first place.
Cool. So that was the film that like really started my filmmaking career. I was a support worker in the bakery. I knew it well. So when I kind of got this opportunity to make a film, I already had a relationship, I guess, with the people there. And what's, I guess, something that's always interested me in filmmaking, particularly documentary, initially was kind of observational filmmaking. So you're sort of in a space, you're in a world, and you're kind of connecting with people. And because I knew this place really well, it was a real opportunity to sort of capture the essence of the place, which was, you know, it was kind of, it's about bread, but it's also about relationships. It's also about respect. It's about disability or ability, and kind of combining all those things together. And I guess the reason I say this film really started my career is it kind of went to lots of festivals, got all these awards, which I wasn't expecting. And it sort of gave me that boost to sort of continue with filmmaking after that, and to sort of beginning to understand or beginning to realize the connection between, I guess, art and sort of political or activist engagement. Like, it's something I've always been interested. Like, I want a film to stand on its own 2 feet. Like this, it had a life kind of in the film world, but it was used by lots of disabilities groups and awareness and things like that. And it was kind of, for me, I guess on a personal level, starting to see like how those things could maybe work together, what they could mean together. And things like that. And then next, I'm actually, so I'm not going to talk about all my films. I realize there's probably too many, so I'm just going to like focus on a few. So a little while after I made this film, I ended up doing a PhD by practice in something called transdisciplinary documentary, which sadly no longer exists. But this was a PhD that was like across disciplines, and filmmaking was a large part of it. And for that, I decided to, again, make a film in Syria. This was in 2010. And at that time, I decided to, I don't know, it was interesting listening to Sutted last week, also talking about working in Syria. Like, you know, like with filmmaking, always, like you have a plan, it doesn't always work out and you figure it out. But that was also the case with Syria, where there was like also restrictions or like access issues, or sometimes you could get around it, sometimes you couldn't. You would try and do things, they wouldn't happen. So this film, I had a plan, and obviously the plan didn't work, and it ended up being something else. And in the end, it ended up becoming a kind of film that was about the year before the revolution, kind of. I mean, that wasn't what I was doing when I was there, but then when I was editing it, the revolution started, and kind of my understandings and emotions connected to the footage had changed quite dramatically from when I was filming it. But the reason I was going to show this one clip is the last week, Sutted mentioned how sometimes being a woman sort of gives you opportunity to get into spaces you might not get into otherwise. Or sometimes, I mean, it's a strange one because, you know, I don't necessarily always think about being a woman when I'm filmmaking. I just get on with it. But like sometimes you recognize your positioning, I guess. And there was this one moment when I was filming in Syria, and I was filming with a monk in Marmusa. So half of the film is set in the monastery, the same monastery I'd made the first film in. And then the second half was with an Iraqi refugee in Damascus. So the monk was like football mad, and I was filming with him. He's like, I'm going to go to a game. Do you want to come? So I went with him, and like, I didn't have permission to film in the stadium. I didn't know if I could get in, but I just kind of went with him. And when I got there, I realized I was the only woman in the whole place, and I was wearing bright yellow clothes. It was to the point where like being like sticking out so much sort of gave you an opportunity to take advantage of being in that context. So I was just going to show you a clip of that because it kind of says to me, at least, says something about like kind of figuring out these different scenarios you find yourself in. Okay.
الجزيرة هو نادي كتير غالي علي وكتير بحبه طبعا.
ليش؟
لأنه أول شيء بيذكرني بالحسكة، لأنه هيك، لأنه أنا بالأخير ما فيني أقول ماني من الحسكة، بالأخير من الحسكة أنا. نادي الجزيرة يعني شربناه بالحليب، شربناه يعني نحن كنا عم نرضع من صدر أمنا وأخوتي بيذكروا الجزيرة، بنروح برا الجزيرة ونحن مشان هيك إنه صار في حب لفريق الجزيرة. كل عناصر الحياة موجودة بملعب كرة القدم. هذا اللي خلاني بنجذب إلى كرة القدم.
And also that film does feature Father Paolo in it again, and he's someone who will inform another film that I worked on. So it's interesting how like one film led to another, led to another, led to another, unfortunately, in this case. That film, A Tale of Two Series, was quite a challenging film to make, just because, as I mentioned, like I filmed it at one time and then I was editing it I filmed it before the revolution, started editing after, and it was just, you know, really emotionally difficult to understand what the material meant and to kind of look at that like not so distant past with a different understanding. And it took some time to sort of appreciate what that material was and having captured something in that year maybe meant. Yeah. So then next I'm going to share a little clip from another film I did in 2013 called Queens of Syria. This was a film I was invited by a friend who was producing a theater like workshop with Syrian women who were displaced to Jordan, and they were going to reinterpret the ancient Greek play The Trojan Women with their own stories. And they invited me to come and make a film about the project. And the thing that I was most interested in doing is sort of following the whole process of it. So I was like, I'm just going to come and show up every day. It was like a 6-week project, and just see what happens. And it was a really interesting experience because, you know, on day one, when they tried to recruit people to come into the project, nobody really understood what it was, what was going to happen, what they thought they would be doing. And it was just really fascinating to kind of be there at the start, and then at the end, the group of women who kind of stayed on with it. So like about 80 started, and in the end it was about 25, I think, or 60, and then 25. Quite a few dropped for various reasons through the process, through the weeks. But by the end, there was a group who kind of went on stage and shared their stories and kind of played this play. And it was a really amazing kind of process of transformation, and quite a transformative experience for me and for the others kind of taking part in it. So I'll just show you a little clip of this. Let me just open it here. So this is in roughly about halfway through the film. And it's at a point when they've been workshopping kind of their stories to kind of see how they could maybe connect to larger stories that would end up in the play.
مين اللي قال؟ هيك ريم وصلتي دغري، ما في اخيرا حتى طبياري. طيب رح نعيد من عند بدون الاهات الاولانيه، بس رح نعيد من هون.
أخيراً وصلت إلى نهاية آلامي بينما مواد الوطن الأول يتحول إلى أمان. الهواية قدماي المنتجفات قوما بجهد الأخير والسرعة حتى ألقي نظرة الوداع احكي وحده.
نحن بدنا كل الطريق، يعني نحن انا بحد النزول، يعني نمت بشي ب 15 بيت. ايوه هيك وصلنا كلياتنا بالاخير على وين؟ هلا وين نحن؟ بالاردن بعمان. فبنعمل خط مستقيم وبنكتب هون مرقنا من كذا اجى مدري شو صار. اللي ما بيقدر يكتب من ساعته. عند البيت بنعمل اول ما طلعنا دائره شو اخذنا معنا اغراض ومين طلع معنا اشخاص. اذا بقلب الطريق فقدنا ناس صار شيء
انا اجيت من بيتي زياره لعند سلفتي، صار القصف عندهم ما عاد فينا نروح لا لعند بيتي وما عاد فينا نكون قاعدين عندهم بالبيت، رحنا بنت حمايه نمنا عندهم ليل.
وطلعنا يعني في ناس طلعت بدون ثياب، يعني الرعب ما بينوصف. نمنا ليله، بعدين صار واص وقصف على سبيله.
الساعة 11:30 بالليل جانا تليفون انه طلعوا هلا من البيت في مداهمة كبيرة بدها تجي على الحي. طلعنا جبنا سيارة وطلعنا نحن انا وامي ومرت اخي والولاد وخواتي 3 من الزوجات واولادهم. وقصف شديد طلعنا من البياضة على منطقة اسمها الدار الكبيرة عند هنيك عمامي وبنت عمي. كمان قعدنا تعذبنا كمان كثير بالطريق، وصلنا على الدار الكبيرة قعدنا مدة اسبوع. بعد ما قعدنا بالدار الكبيرة عند عمي وبنات عمي وكانوا كلهم طالعين طبعا دير بعلمي، قعدنا عنده كمان مدة اسبوع 10 ايام. تفاجأنا خبر اجانا هون يعني استشهدوا اخوات 2 وقبل الله يرحمهم. لموهم وربطوا لهم ايديهم وغمضوا لهم عينيهم واخذوهم على محل بعيد، على مخزن هو عبارة عن غرفة ضمن غرفة، يعني محل ما حدا بيعرفه. ووقفوهم على حيط ورشوهم بكل دم بارد وقتلوهم. وبقيوا شي 4 أيام والجثث على الأرض. راح جوز أختي تعرف على الجثة وإجوا الشباب وجابون ودفنون بمقبرة جماعية.
So that section, I don't know, it gets me every time. And I remember like when she shared that particular story in the workshop, it was the first time she'd actually said it to anyone. And it was a very like emotional moment. And then it ended up becoming in the play. And so I started to sort of, I guess, when I was filming, it was quite interesting to start to see like, oh, I could actually just cut the workshops with the play. You know, it wasn't like they were building up to the play, but we've actually seen parts of the play before in the structure of the film, because it just sort of had, for me, like an emotional resonance to kind of cut them into each other. And although that section is sad, there's also a lot of moments of laughter and enjoyment and kind of personal growth. So it was quite an interesting process to film and be there for. And then I might show you just a clip, or just the trailer rather, of my newest film titled Ayuni. Excuse me. which is a film about forcible disappearance in Syria. And I mentioned the two previous films in Syria because it includes Father Paolo Dall'Olio, who I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with him, but he was the priest at that monastery where the other monk you saw was, and he was kidnapped in 2013 in Raqqa by Daesh. And before that happened, I'd actually reached out to him again to say, like, can we make a new film together? We'd like done stuff before, we'd been in touch. You know, I had this long archive with him, and I thought, you know, he had become quite outspoken. He ended up becoming expelled from Syria and very active kind of in the revolutionary activist circles. He set up a TV talk show, bringing different people together to talk. He was meeting with lots of people. Like, he was outspoken and very active. And I thought it was quite interesting, sort of this transformation of him and I thought it would be interesting to make a film essentially about a priest in the Syrian revolution. That was kind of the starting point, is like this, you know, what position is that? What does it mean? What does it look like? You know, and him as a person, you know, like, I think he always was politically engaged, but it kind of was being expressed in a different way, you know, post 2011. So we got in touch. I met him a couple of months before he was kidnapped, and we filmed once. It was kind of like the first new set of filming for this new film in Paris. He was actually releasing a book titled A Priest in the Syrian Revolution. And a couple of months later, like everyone else, I got the news that he'd smuggled himself into Raqqa to try and negotiate the release of kidnapped journalists, and then he was kidnapped. And that process put me on a different track to sort of try to understand forcible disappearance in Syria, to see that it was being used as a war crime. I hadn't really kind of considered it as much before that, and realizing that, you know, the regime has disappeared more than 100,000 people. Like, they're the biggest perpetrators of this crime. And through that process, I, you know, connected with his family. I also reconnected with someone else's story, who I knew briefly, not very well, but I knew briefly in Syria, Basil Safadi, who had set up the first hack lab in Damascus. And he'd been in prison for 3 years, and many of his friends internationally were, you know, had this campaign, the Free Basil campaign, to kind of shed light on him and his story. And then he was then taken from his cell and disappeared. And at that point, I met his wife. I connected with his wife when we started filming. And Nora is a very kind of active and inspiring person. She's a human rights lawyer. She's kind of dealt with detention in Syria for a long time because it happened to her own father. It's something she kind of experienced growing up as well. And also obviously through the story of her boyfriend and husband. So yeah, I'll just show you a little, I'll just show you the trailer for this actually.
And I understand you got married while he was still in prison, is that right?
Yes, yep. We got married, we made the marriage contract on January 7th, 2013.
Yep.
And they call us the bride and the groom of the Syrian Revolution.
There are at least 5 people of our network who were killed.
What do you think about your own safety?
I'm pretty safe.
But you upload all this material, you get it out to the world.
يبدو أن هناك من أخذ موقف ضدنا. أبونا باولو للسدين، يعني أبونا باولو شخصي يعني يضر.
Il 29 luglio dello scorso anno veniva sequestrato a Raqqa, nel nord della Siria, padre Paolo Dall'Olio, gesuita romano. Di lui.
Personalmente, ma non solo io, proviamo a assumerci il rischio della speranza.
I didn't see the body. I didn't see document. I didn't see anything, any evidence.
Do you think you ever will?
I have to. I will keep going on to have his body and all the information about his death, the way, the date, all the thing. I have to, all the people, all the Syrians have to, this is a humanitarian right. So I have to face this disaster.
So this film, for those who don't speak Arabic, ayuni means my eyes, but it's also a term of endearment, referring to your love or your loved ones. And this film, I realized after working on it, it took about 7-8 years to make, that it was really about love. So that was kind of the driving force, I guess, love between siblings or love between a couple. And it was also a film that I ended up, I realized I had this large archive with Paolo. So some of the footage, even in the trailer, some's from 2004, some's from 2010. There's like kind of a long history of material that was my own that I used, as well as new material. And then Noura actually gave me access to archive of her and Basil together. So there's footage of them when they first met, or recently, soon after they first met. And of her, so I could kind of build a story, even though I wasn't there. I could kind of use this archive to tell a story of this couple and of this person. I had access to some footage of Basil, and it was interesting. Basil's friends gave me an archive, a hard drive that was full of material he had been helping to collect to send to news broadcasters of areas under siege in 2011. And as I was looking through the material, we would sometimes, I didn't realize some of the footage was filmed by Basil, and sometimes we got glimpses of him in it. So, we kind of pulled out all these little fragments to try and, show us the presence of Paolo, of Basil, to kind of like Paolo, particularly larger than life presence, loud kind of person who suddenly disappeared, absent, not there, and what does it mean? And although, I didn't know the film would take so long, the fact that we kind of followed the story over years, that sense of absence, I understood that sense of absence as it transformed for Maki, Paolo's sister, and for Noura, Basil's wife, over time, because at different stages there was a different kind of sense of what it felt like, what it meant. So the film, I really wanted to tell it as much as possible in the present tense. It's not people telling us about Basil or telling us about Paolo, but we're actually with Basil and Paolo first. And then, when they're disappeared, we're with those who are kind of searching for answers. Yeah, so I guess that's the starting point. Those are the clips of the films. And I'm happy to, answer any questions or anything. And nice to see Alice Guthrie, another name I know, and Reem. We met in Damascus many years ago. So it's nice to see you here. So yeah, please feel free to ask anything about any film, really.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. That was really very inspiring and sincere insights of your journey through the filmmaking. My name is Asser. I'm one of the people who are behind this initiative. My gratitude goes to Ribal, my colleagues. Unfortunately, she has some other commitments, but the floor is open now for any more questions to Yasmin. Please feel free to unlock your muting system and join us for any questions if there is any. Thank you.
It's okay if I ask a question.
Please, yeah.
Thank you. No, thanks. That was really lovely and fascinating and really inspiring. You mentioned art and activism earlier on, and I was just interested in the interplay of those two things, creative process, and if you could maybe talk about that a bit more. That I found that quite an interesting point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I see myself as a filmmaker, but I also see myself as an activist, and that has expressed itself in different ways, I guess, in different times of my life. But film, I guess the art, and I think film, it needs to work as a film. When you're working on a film, it needs to, I want it to have a life as a film. I want people to watch the film not only because they care about the subject or the issue, I guess, first, but the connection with activism has looked different in different projects. And I think it's just about being open to recognize maybe your responsibility. So on one level, like with this one, I felt with Ayuni, I had a responsibility. Like, I had access to Paolo's like I had a long archive with Paolo. I had access to his family. Nora gave me access to her archives. She'd let me film her for many years. Like you feel a responsibility that we have to tell this story. And also in this scenario with Syria, like these stories are being kind of disappeared on purpose. The regime has been trying to write a narrative and write these people out of it. And I think in this kind of case, it's really important to put films out there that are kind of countering that narrative and saying, these people existed, this happened, this is what they did, and we can't forget that. And I think film can be a powerful means to do that. So in this case, it was very much about like saying, this is another version of something, something we can't forget. And what it looked like, I guess, with the film's only released last year, so it's still early days, but I guess some of the activism has looked like is, we've done sort of impact screenings. So we've done stuff with like the EU delegation on Syria. We've done it for different briefings. So trying to use the film as a way to unlock discussion around detention and forcible disappearance in Syria, because there are like a network of families in Syria and different organizations that are kind of fighting for these causes. So, if the film can help in any of that as a linchpin, as an excuse to bring a conversation together, that's what we're doing at the moment. I mean, I hope we can do more in the future. In other films, again, it's looked different, but even with Queens of Syria, like, I wanted to make a kind of compelling narrative of this thing that happened. But then you realize when you're doing something, like there's still so much prejudice against like Arab or Muslim women who wear niqab, women who wear hijab, and it's like, I can't believe I still have to like face this, So just the very fact of making a film where they're like full body 3D kind of people who, appreciate theater and are willing to express themselves, just the very act of doing that, unfortunately, is still important. And I think, with that film, we kind of did all different kinds of screenings. The play itself also had a life of its own. So, just I guess providing that platform is sometimes part of the activism. I also teach, I teach a course on art and activism at Queen Mary, film and activism. And it's interesting because, through the history of film and looking at different forms, there's so many different ways you can do it. But I guess for me, the essence of what that means is like, films are an opportunity to bring people together to talk about something, and at the very essence, if we can do that, that's the first stage, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, please feel free to.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth, I'm saying. Hi, everyone. Yasmin, I attended your talk also with the Wafa Mustafa about.
Oh, great.
And I'm fascinated by your work. And I have two questions. First, how does one get access to your work? If I want to see one of these films, what is the way to do that? And secondly, what are you working on nowadays?
Great. Thanks for coming to that talk. I think it was last week. So Wafa is also, her father was disappeared and she campaigns and does advocacy around that. And it was really interesting to actually have a conversation with her around that, because obviously she's not the person I filmed, but it was interesting to see how someone else kind of who's familiar with these issues and is close to, it was a really interesting conversation for me to kind of unpick what film can do or try to do in this situation where people have been disappeared, like what is it we're trying to do when we can't film something. But yeah, to my films, I'll put the links. You can actually see like Ayuni on its website, and there's a collection of my films on a platform called True Story. So I'll share that, and all the ones I mentioned can be accessed there. And oh yeah, what am I working on now? It's very, very early days, so it's quite hard to say exactly what it looks like, but there's seeds, I don't know. I've planted lots of seeds and they're starting to germinate. And the two that are slowly germinating, like I'm really interested in this subject that's, there's this really interesting medical anthropologist from Iraq, and he's been, Amar Dewachi, and he's been doing a lot of research on this superbug that's anti-resistant, it's resistant to antibiotics, but it's sort of developed in the particular context of war and conflict, and particularly in Iraq. And I think it just tells us a lot about our relationship to politics and nature and health, and it's all kind of connected. So in the early days of pitching that actually to different funders. And then another one that's still early days, this is something I've thought about for many years. My great-grandfather is from Palestine. His wife was from Damascus, so he ended up in Damascus in 48. But he worked, you know, when it was the British Mandate of Palestine, he was a teacher, and Britain found everybody when they were like of pensionable age, even when they were displaced. So he got this pension, and he lived till over 100. So he got a pension for a very, very long time from Britain in Damascus. But anyway, I'm using that as a starting point to explore the relationship of British Empire with Palestine, but sort of through bureaucracy and administration, because he was receiving a pension for a place that kind of no longer existed, but it went on for like almost 50 years. Anyway, so early days about that. Yeah, hopefully it will, you know, develop.
Great, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your questions. Any more questions? Reem, please go ahead.
I'm not sure it's going to come out as a question because it's just
all right.
But basically, I think as a result of activism, and we can't, partly because we're Arabs and it's just inbred and, you know, we've been breastfed it, but then we're artists in different ways. But what I found, at least in the last 5-10 years, there is no filmmaking and theater and music. Somehow it's do what you're passionate about, yes, but also what you can to get the message out, whatever that message is. So you filmed the process of a play being produced. That play wasn't allowed to go to the US. So in the US, they screened parts of films and photographs. We've recorded some oral histories and turned them into a filmed play. It's all about what can we get out there. And so I personally love that. But how do you, though, because I don't consider myself a particular kind of artist or filmmaker, but you started out as a filmmaker first, maybe activist second, or in parallel. I said it wasn't going to come out of the question. Do with it.
No, it's a good starting point, though, because I mean, for me, they've always been connected. And they always sort of happen together. And sometimes the activism is actually curating. You know, it's like, let's put on, like, you know, on the 10-year commemoration of the invasion of Iraq, we put on a festival of Iraqi art and culture in around the UK, in like 8 cities around the UK, as a thing to say, like, we need to talk about this, you know, we can't forget this happened and what's the repercussions of this, you know. So sometimes it's not actually like directly filmmaking. I mean, for me, it's filmmaking because that's the craft, I guess, that I'm really interested in, but I'm not limited to it. And I think you're right. Sometimes they're all mixed in together. Like, you know, there was a theater play that could have completely existed without me being there, you know, but then by making a film, it's like a different version of what that was, you know, because you kind of, it wasn't just like a straight record. There was a, you know, there was a layer of editorial and creative input to kind of give it another story. And I think you're right. Like sometimes it is just figuring out what you do. I've figured out what I do is film, you know, or film related stuff. And so that's how it comes out this way. But I think it is just about figuring out what those things are and what your strengths are and putting that out there. Because I think, you know, it's really about trying to emotionally engage with people, you know, and it might be through music, it might be through film. Because I think that emotional connection is the starting point for activism. I mean, there are the bigger things, but I think if someone can feel something, that's the first step, you know, like why else would they care? Like, yeah.
Great, thank you, Reem. Thank you very much, Yasmin. Any more questions on the floor?
I was just interested in if you had a thought on, because the majority of the works that we've seen today, or all of them, are documentary, and if you had a view on that as a more compelling medium than, you know, like narrative fiction, or if there was a conscious thing to do, you know, in relation to that.
It's a good question. I mean, I really love fiction filmmaking or narrative filmmaking. I've never done it myself, and I may one day, but I don't know. But the difference, I don't know if it's necessarily more compelling. I guess on a personal level, I've always been attracted. I mean, documentary filmmaking is just quite messy and hard because you're dealing with real life. You know, it's not like, here's the script and I know when I'm doing it and I'm done. I mean, not that it's not hard, but like you work in a completely different way. For me, it's much more like what's the scenario? Okay, I kind of understand it. I'm going to start engaging with it. But then you have to be open to the mess of life. And then when you edit, you sort of try to give it some sense. And I guess I've been attracted to that creative process of like working with the messiness of life and giving it some form. I don't know if it's more compelling, because obviously fiction can be absolutely compelling, you know, or artist kind of more experimental work I find really also compelling. So I think, you know, but the difference with documentaries, not always, but normally you're working with real people in real situations, and that's maybe the big sign of, or the big shift of difference. You know, it's like when you're working with real people, there's a different set of ethical considerations that you have to think about that you might not be thinking about in a different context. You know, and it's about interpersonal skills. You know, it's like how you are with people, the relationships you build with people. It can be quite tiring, you know, because you have to build a relationship of trust with people. So like even Queens of Syria, like it was quite an interesting process. Like in the beginning, a lot of women were like, oh, I don't want to be on screen. So then I would not film them, you know. And then if you noticed in the clip I showed, some had their blurred faces. That's because some people I couldn't get out of the shot. Like there was just too many people around. But then some people, like when I finished the film and showed it, they were so proud of it. They're like, why am I not in the film? I was like, because you told me not to film you, you know. But that changed. And some people gave me permission to film, but then changed their mind because of realities that changed for them in their real life, or the vice versa. You know, there was one woman who she was like, oh, I can't, you know, be in this film, but she kind of had a great contribution. And when I was editing about a year after filming, I contacted her to ask if I could use it. And she said, like, you know, I'm happy for you to use it, because unfortunately the reason I didn't want to be involved, and she kind of dropped out of the project, was her son was imprisoned and they didn't know what was happening. She was scared that, you know, taking part in this might have some effect on him if it's in the public sphere. And then she found out her son had been murdered. He was like 15, you know. But it changed her perspective on it, and she was like, no, I want my voice to be heard now, you know, I'm not scared anymore. And it was only a small contribution. But so with documentaries, there's all these like questions, and especially in a context like Syria, where like fear and actual violence, you know, there's all these things in the air. You kind of have to constantly negotiate these things. Yeah, I don't know why I keep being attracted to this, because every time I do it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so hard and messy. But I still, like, this film at uni was a really, you know, complex and challenging project. But like I said, sometimes you're just compelled. Like this film happened to me. I made it, but I felt like kind of dropped on me and I had to make it, you know. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elias, for the question, and thank you, Yasmin, for the answer. Great. I have actually an observation. I don't know, again, it's not a question, but I do remember being in Liverpool Arab Art Festival a couple of years ago with the play on the stage.
Oh, wow.
And I was trying to compare between the acts and the casts on your film and the ladies on the stage. Were they the same or were they different?
So I saw a version of what came here. It was actually a different play, inspired by the first one, but I think they'd sort of done it. And I think about half, there was a chunk of the women that were the same, but some were different. And then the play was it was more about migration, you know, so it kind of changed versions, which I wasn't involved in, so I didn't really see how it happened. But some of the women were the same, and I saw them in London, which was quite amazing. And it was amazing to see, you know, some women at the beginning of that particular process were just quite shy and like, you know, wanting to do it but not sure, and then suddenly they're on stage and then they've traveled, and just that sense of confidence was just quite amazing, you know. And not something I think the organizers of the project or myself expected, you know. It was just like a byproduct, I guess, but it was an important one. It was that sense of esteem and confidence that came from being involved in something like this and finding community with other people, because there were several of the women when I met them didn't have any family or friends, so taking part in this created that network, which was really important.
Thanks so much for the clarification, Jasmine. Any more questions, please?
The link, please.
Okay, if you hold on, let me do it right now.
Please.
Yes, I will send them to you. here.
Keep doing this, Yasmin. I just want to mention to the viewers that we will be also, after the recording, we'll be uploading the whole meeting today and the talk, and it will be slightly edited. However, we will be able to also add to the page all the links to Yasmin's films, the bios, the website, all the other information that you might be interested in. So yeah, we'll be doing this anyway. But thank you for
Thank you.
it's now it's available on the chat. Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Where would it be posted?
It's gonna be on YouTube on the AWAN Festival website.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will keep you informed by an email later on once it's ready, so you can access this as well.
Good, good.
Thank you so much. Any more questions, please?
I have a question. Hi, Asa. Hi. Yeah, really lovely, interesting talk and clips. I had to miss the start. I just wondered if it would be interesting to know kind of how it's gone with iUni, because I know that it came out during the pandemic and you had to have digital release. And since it's such an important film and an activist film, really, do you feel that you've managed to reach, or perhaps it's even managed to reach further with it being online? It'd be interesting to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, good question. I think releasing a film during the pandemic was challenging. It didn't have the like normal, let's go to all these festivals as a starting point, because that, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, it kind of gives more publicity to your film, you know, if it kind of gets that recognition. It had, I guess, less of that during the pandemic, although it was released about like last March at CPH Docs in Denmark. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. So we've done events, so like, you know, I did the talk with Wyatt, I've done several talks with Noura, targeting different people, you know, some were briefings, some were towards EU people, some were for film audiences. I feel like there's still a lot more to do, you know, like it's still, I feel like we're just at the beginning of that journey. And I hope that, you know, by getting, you know, we've had some good reviews, that helps. And I think we just keep building on that. What we've done is we translated the film into 7 languages that we thought were the first set of languages that are important for this subject. So it's like Russian, German, French, Spanish, English, Arabic, that's it, and Italian. And I think, you know, that's the starting point, and I'd like us to develop more kind of outreach in those areas and in those different regions. So yeah, it's done well. It's had really good media coverage, which is really good, because it's like at least saying like, this is out there, these are these people's stories, let's talk about them. And I'm hoping for more.